It's that wonderful time of the year again. Leaf blowers. You might be able to hear them in the background, but I'm just going to go with it and try to adapt. So, welcome back to another episode of Sacred Wild Man. My name is Roy, and for today's topic, I'm going to focus on self-hate and resentment. Now, this is inspired due to the work that I do as a therapist. My specialty is working with men and helping them reclaim their masculinity. And something that I've been seeing time and again is that a lot of men seem to have this sense of incompetence within themselves. They feel that they aren't able to do things or make their dreams a reality. And what ensues after that sense of, I just can't make it happen, is this sense of self-hate and resentment, which isn't always on their conscious level of awareness. It might just be bubbling underneath. And this is something that weighs on me quite a bit because I am very well aware of how this feels. Like, much of my life has been that experience of believing that I can't do something, and then the ensuing self-hate and resentment. And this is something that I really desire to help men work through so that they can realize their power and reclaim that power and make things happen that they want in their life. So, a good place to start is to examine where self-hate and resentment comes from. Now, often the origins are in childhood. There's some sort of event, and that shapes our perception of how the world works. So an example could be, let's say as a kid, you were walking through a toy store, or maybe it's just a regular store that has a toy aisle, but you're walking through, and then you see this toy just over there. It's like, it's perfect. Maybe it's an action figure, or it's some trading cards, but you see it and you're like, I gotta have it. This is it. And you quickly run to find your parents, and then you say, hey, can you get this toy for me? I really want it. It's gonna be great. It's perfect. I need this toy. And you're just filled with excitement and joy at the possibility that you're gonna get this toy now. And let's say your parent responds, I'm not going to get that toy for you. It's stupid. It's a waste of money. I'm not spending my money on that. Notice how that feels. Even as I talk about it, I am aware of this sudden just like brakes, slamming on the brake pads on that initial excitement. And as a kid, I can imagine how all of a sudden there's shame, there's embarrassment, and there's just this shrinking sense of perhaps doom, or just feeling terribly small and insignificant, not valued or not worthy of something. And from that point on, that child has internalized a message. And it's likely a message that falls beneath his level of awareness. That tends to be the case for children. Like, if you ask children, hey, what do you think about this? Or how do you feel about this? Often it's like, I don't know. But they demonstrate what they feel or believe through their actions, how they play. And so for that child, that internalized message underneath his level of awareness likely sounds like, what I want, my needs, desires are a waste of money, and they're stupid. And then to take it even further, he might have, at the level, unconscious level of awareness, the belief that I myself am a waste of time and am stupid. Because often that's the case for children. And again, it's not something that they're ever consciously aware of. It's very easy to take it very personally from my desire for something and turn that into, this is not just about my desires, but this is about me as a person and my inherent worth or lack thereof. And that's something that children do because, early on, being a child is the most kind of helpless time in your life because you're dependent on the caregivers to take care of you. The assumption is that they will be there to provide for you. And so if your own caregivers are giving you this message, right, that what you want is stupid and a waste of money, then that's a very deep wound. And as children do, they always take it personally. It's not, it's not my parents' fault. It must be something wrong with me, and therefore I need to fix what is effed up in myself because I'm the problem. It's not my parents, it's me. Now that child has established a blueprint for everything else that they encounter in their life around the theme of desire. So let's say that child, that boy, is now an adult, and he perhaps wants a raise at work. He's a really hard worker, very talented, or perhaps he wants to enter a romantic relationship with somebody that he really likes. Now, in both cases, there's desire. There's a desire to get a raise, and there's a desire to go on a date with a woman he's been attracted to for a long time. Now, what happens in those scenarios is that the moment that desire is triggered, that blueprint that was internalized and established back in childhood gets, boom, activated. Because desire is an experience. You feel it. It's a physiological sensation. You don't think, oh, I have a desire right now. That thought, that cognitive thought of I want something, comes far after the experience in your body. So your body feels and hears things much quicker than your rational cognitive mind will process it. So what happens is that desire is triggered. I want to raise. I want to go on this date with this woman. Now what happens is that old blueprint has this domino effect. So here's desire. I'm feeling desire to go on this date with this woman. I want to ask her out, or I want to ask my boss for a raise. The next part of that blueprint that has been established in childhood then is the negative feedback from the parent. I'm not going to get you that toy. It's a waste of money and it's stupid. So what comes next is, here's desire, and man, what's this unpleasant feeling all of a sudden? Again, that's not a rational thought at the moment. It's not at the conscious level of awareness. It's subconscious. But all of a sudden, there's this unexplainable feeling of discomfort. It can be easy to just, shrug it off as, I'm just nervous. I'm nervous to ask her out, or I'm nervous to ask my boss for a raise. That's absolutely reasonable. But that old blueprint is still there. That's deeply entrenched. And so that unpleasant feeling takes over, and then you have the belief that was paired with that activated. So here goes desire, then here comes that feeling, and then the belief gets activated under that level of awareness. So it's subconscious of what I want is stupid, what I want is not worth it. And when it's internalized about oneself, then that man, so in childhood as a boy, he has that message. Now as an adult man, when he thinks about asking for a raise or asking a woman out on a date, that same narrative plays out in that domino effect of, I have this desire, I'm feeling this feeling that doesn't feel good, and you know what? I'm not worth a raise. Why would I be worth a raise? And why would she even go on a date with me if I were to ask her? Right? That old message of stupid and not worth it gets activated because that's that blueprint. And a person can spend his entire life trying to prove that blueprint because it was established in childhood, and the message he takes away, if the parents don't come back and process that further, like, I said that because I was frustrated and it wasn't fair to say that to you. What you want isn't stupid or a waste of money, and perhaps there's an explanation to go with it. That can give that child a different perception of that experience rather than the one he takes away. But in this example, let's say that boy did not get it. So he's only stuck with that blueprint. And the way it goes is, I think human beings tend to go through life in a way to validate all their previous experiences and their beliefs about themselves, conscious and subconscious. And so if anything strikes that belief system in a way that is not in harmony, then we kind of push it away. And so in some instances, it's very common to see people reject the very thing that they say that they want. And so for this man, it might be the case where perhaps his boss says, you know what, we've been thinking about giving you a raise, and I think we're going to move forward with that. Some part of himself might suddenly have this imposter syndrome that kicks in and says, no, like, you don't need to do that. I'm happy with what I'm earning now, and I'm sure there's other people who deserve this raise more than me. Or he might say that with a woman who's actually attracted to him and wants to go on a date with him. He might think, this woman is not my type. We just don't jive together. It's just not going to work. And all the while, none of that might actually be true. It might be, in fact, that old blueprint that gets triggered of somebody else wants me? No, that doesn't make any sense, because I am stupid and not worth it. And so if somebody is saying that I am worth it, this doesn't work out with my belief system, so I'm going to push them away. Now, how people can often deal with this sense of self-hate and resentment is that they project it outwards. So in that last example where he, using the date scenario, this woman wants to go on a date with him, he can project his own self-hate and resentment out onto her. And it doesn't necessarily mean he has to hate her or resent her, but there's some sense that he definitely cannot accept her wants to get to know him better. And so the idea is that probably something's wrong with this woman, and he might start to give all these reasons of like, her looks or her voice or how she dresses, how she, it just is not going to work out. It's not going to work out for me. Other times it can be more aggressive display of that projection. And so let's say this man, the same example, right? So this boy who is now a man, he gets married, he has kids, and let's say his own child is one day in a toy store now, or running down the aisle, the toy aisle in a store, and wants to pick out a toy. That's going to reactivate that old memory and that old blueprint. Now, if he has healed that, he will likely have no problem of celebrating the joy his child has in a toy, and he may or may not get that toy for his child depending on the circumstances. So let's say, actually I won't go into that, that's just another tangent, but he can either get the toy for his child or not get the toy for his child in a way that still supports and nurtures his child, assuming that he has healed his own pain of desire, that moment when he was a boy in that toy aisle. But let's assume now that he has never healed that. He still has that internalized message of his wants and desires are stupid and not worth it, and therefore he is stupid and not worth it. He will, in one scenario, perhaps look at his child and say, no, I'm not going to get that toy for you. It's stupid, it's a waste of money, we're not going to spend our time on that, right? We're here to get our groceries and we're here to leave. So he reenacts essentially what he experienced onto his own child. Or on the other extreme, he might overdo it and lavish his child with what he didn't get. So yes, I'll get this toy for you. I'll get all the toys for you. And in both cases, it can lead to damage, because children do not do well when you just are cold and cut them off from any sense of joy or desire. And they also don't do well when you overindulge them. In both cases, that adult man's response in those two scenarios is still coming from a place of unhealed, I would say, pain in his own life. So that's an example of how it can be projected outwards. And oftentimes the unconscious mechanism of projection is this idea that if what is wrong in here can be put out there and I can solve it out here, then perhaps I don't have to deal with it inside anymore. Perhaps because it means I've solved it, right? Because the problem is out here, it's not in here. And this can be in cases of people who are extremely controlling, because the idea is I can control what's out here. If I can control what's out here, then I no longer have to deal with what is at dis-ease internally. I don't have to deal with myself, because it's much easier to look at the external problems, put the problems out here, whether that's people or circumstances, than to own up and face the painful realization that, gosh, I do hate myself, I do resent myself, and I don't know why, and I don't want to sit with that. It's much easier to put the problem outside externally. And the unfortunate news with this, that every person will realize that at some point who does this external projection, is that you can't change other people, and you can't change external circumstances that are outside of your control. You can try. And often what people find is that when you do try to do that, you have a lot of stress, you have a lot of resentment, you don't enjoy life, and you just have a lot of anxiety. You're constantly worrying, thinking about things, and you're always at dis-ease. And the problem is, for a person who is always how should I say this? For a person who's always dependent on external circumstances to remain a certain way, that person will always be at dis-ease. Because again, you can't change other people, and you can't change external circumstances that are outside of your control. You can't change the weather at will. You can't force somebody to like something that you like when they genuinely don't like it. And the problem is when people attempt to shoehorn reality to meet what they want, they will inevitably cause lots of damage. They will likely push people out of their lives, and they will likely cut out opportunities for themselves. And then in the end, they're still left sitting alone, having to hold this experience of, why do I feel so terrible? It's like a man who wants his plants to grow instantaneously, right? There's that attempting to shoehorn reality to meet his pace and expectations. So he just dumps a ton of water every day on the plant, and what happens is he ends up killing it. Or another example can be people who grasp so tightly to, I need this to be this way. I need this relationship. I need this job. Whatever it is. And if you were to have this visualization of that thing that they desire as a dove sitting in their hands, that need for it to be that way, to grasp so tightly on it, is going to crush that dove's wings. And I don't imagine that you can enjoy that dove anymore. It's not an open-handed approach where the dove is free to fly out of your hands and also free to fly back. And you can accept it in a way that is open-handed and non-attached to outcomes or it being a certain way. Now, a personal example of this, because what I like to do is, I don't enjoy just sitting here and say, hey, I have it all figured out, because I'm continuously on my own journey. So I'd like to share an example of how I deal with this on my own. So a couple of years back, I was working at an inpatient psychiatric hospital. The whole idea was, I'm here to get experience, right? Because I'm in the field of psychology. And it'd be good to know what inpatient experience is like, working with inpatient folks, understanding the system there. And it was a consistent income, because at the time I was just beginning to launch my business, and I was not going to make consistent income that way. And just being a new therapist, it's not a well-established one. I'm not going to get a ton of referrals. So this was a way to get consistent income, get insurance health benefits, and also get experience. when I interviewed for the job, I looked up the reviews. So I was already coming in with an understanding that this isn't the greatest place, based on the reviews from patients, based on the reviews from past or current employees, and even my supervisor, who was the one who did the interview and hired me. It was almost like he was apologizing to me for offering me the job. But I appreciated his honesty, and that was kind of the reason why I accepted this position, even though it wasn't ideal. And talking to my other coworkers, that was kind of the same. They're like, I appreciate the honesty and earnestness of our supervisor. So I take the job, very fast-paced, very challenging in certain ways, but it was a job, and it was something where I could get experience, learn, so I appreciated that. Very quickly, though, I realized, based from my coworkers and from the patients, what I was seeing at that inpatient psychiatric hospital is there is a lot of subpar performance. And in our job, we are the grunt workers. We're the ones who get people in, and without us, basically, there's no business for the hospital. As another coworker put it, we are the heartbeat of that hospital, but we also get shit on all the time. And it was getting to a point where, like, okay, I don't know how much longer I can be here, and it has nothing to do with the coworkers in my department, but most of it was coming from the higher ups, the CEO and his CEO, people who just aren't down here in the trenches. And then my supervisor left, and then we got another supervisor, and later that supervisor left. So there's a huge turnover rate, and my colleagues were also beginning to drop out, and so there was this sense that there's this mass exodus. And so the higher ups are doing damage control, trying to keep people to stay, with no actual promise or laying out of concrete actions that they were going to take to improve things within our department and the whole hospital as a whole. And just getting very typical corporate responses, much like politicians. And I had to make a decision, but being highly kind of risk averse myself, I was thinking, there was one voice that was like, hey, don't leave this place because you're not going to have consistent income. You're not going to have insurance benefits anymore. Like, what are you going to do? It's not safe. It's not safe. And that is usually the dominant part of me, the more risk averse. So I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Maybe I can just endure this a little bit longer. Perhaps there'll be new people who will come on. Maybe we'll just stick it out and see. And that was getting a little hairy because I had promised myself I'm going to stay for a year minimum. And I was coming up on a year. And I was getting very antsy with that promise because I was thinking, all right, once a year hits, like, I'm out. But again, that risk averse part was talking, and it was like, do I make it a year and a half, maybe 2 years? And then I'm aware of this other voice that's like, what the hell are you doing? You know you don't like working here. Your coworkers don't like working here. Why the hell are you still here? Get the F out and do something else. We can't stay here anymore. And it was really tough balancing out these two voices. And they certainly were competing against each other, and there was no sense of collaboration between the two. And here I'm kind of, we'll say, the status quo mode of operation. Me is here in the middle, like, I don't know, but I'm leaning more towards the voice that's risk averse. And as I began to realize all of this internal conversation, I had, I don't know if it was a realization or just something that was in the process of making itself more salient after these repeated experiences and dragging this out of, if I complain anymore, at this point it's my fault, because there's nobody holding a gun to my head saying you have to stay here. And although I deeply enjoyed the camaraderie I had with my fellow coworkers, because we're the ones in the trenches, I was beginning to realize that it was not healthy anymore for me to just go on rants or complain with my coworkers who would often do the same. Because it's like, well, we actually have a choice. We can leave or we can stay. And there's risks and consequences to both of those choices. But that's a decision we each need to make for ourselves. And so I was getting tired of myself complaining. I was like, dude, you're complaining about the same shit every day. And the only thing that'll change is when you make a choice, are you going to leave or are you going to stay? And finally it got to a point where it's like, okay, I am going to leave. I'm going to leave and accept the risk and consequence that I'm not going to have consistent income and I'm not going to have health insurance benefits anymore. I'm going to have to go back on crappy state insurance, and I'm going to have to take a risk of not having consistent income. Yes, I've accumulated some savings here, so I can rely on that, but I'm certainly not going to have the same coming in as that's going out with your just general expenses. And I think what helped solidify this decision for me, one was just the drawn out amount of time. Like I was really feeling it. I was like, I can't stay here much longer. And also the belief in my own vision and dreams to create my own business and to offer the gift that I have to the world rather than stay stuck here and work for somebody else whose vision that I don't agree with. And I made that decision, and I can't tell you how happy I felt when I finally left. On my last day, I just dropped off my badge, hopped in my car, sang a few songs to bid this place farewell. Good luck to the people who are still here, not holding a tense amount of bitterness towards this place, and ready to move forward on my own. And I think that's one of the things that people get stuck in. I notice, with the male clients that I work with, is that the risks and consequences seem too scary. I'm stepping out of my comfort zone. I'm stepping out of what is familiar to me, and that's one of the there's so much cognitive dissonance. It's like an intense mind fuck there of, I am so miserable with where I'm at or a belief system that I have, yet I don't know if I actually want to leave this because it's most familiar to me and I don't know what's on the other side. And so sometimes what needs to happen is that the pain of staying the same has to be so much greater than the pain of changing and doing something new, walking into uncertainty, in order for a person to actually begin to move forward in that direction of, I'm going to step forward into uncertainty. I'm going to step forward into something new because I can't stand this being the same anymore. Something has to change. And sometimes that's, it's life circumstances, and sometimes that's a person's health. Their own physical body will give them messages of, we can't stay here anymore. We have got to change. And if you're not going to change, fine. I'm going to give you some chronic illness until you feel so in pain that you have to deal with this now. And sometimes that's more often than not what chronic illness is. It's a symptom of a deeper issue. And it can be easier to deal with a physical issue or a health issue than it can be to deal with this deeper psychological, emotional, and spiritual issue. Because it's much easier to say, yeah, I have chronic back pain, and I need to take meds for it. I've always had chronic back pain. I probably will always have it, than to deal with this other deeper issue of, well, it's not about the back pain at all. It's about how much I hate myself and my unwillingness to actually face that, and then that manifests as perhaps chronic back pain. Now, a great quote that illustrates this threshold of pain for change that I spoke about is a quote by Anais Nin. "The day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom." So that's a quote that deeply resonated with me, and something that I come back to remind myself when I feel stuck in something that is too familiar and too self-limiting, those deeply entrenched self-limiting beliefs. So, what do you do? What does a person do if they find themselves in this place? How do you deal with this self-hate and resentment? A good place to start is to do the inner work. And that can be through working with some sort of coach, like a life coach, or working with a therapist. Because the whole idea is everything that you have been doing that hasn't been working, you need somebody else to come in with a fresh pair of eyes to see things that you don't see. And often what this journey looks like is it's very much about the internal work. It's no longer about what's wrong with the world and projection, but what do I need to deal with in here? And it's that process of inner work, of internal alchemy, that you can begin to change. You can transmute, what this old pain is into something new. And another helpful thing that you can do, in addition to working with a therapist or a coach, is to give yourself an affirmation. So whether you put this on your phone or write it on your mirror, but the affirmation of, from this point forward, I am taking full responsibility for every aspect of my life. Now, if you repeat that affirmation so it stays stuck in your subconscious mind, you will begin to take that perspective for everything. So things that previously might have bothered you, and you would say, these other people are stupid, it's their fault. The more you repeat that affirmation, the more you will begin to take responsibility for those things. So it can be, I have a noisy upstairs neighbor. Man, does this person not have any respect for their fellow neighbors? Although that might be true, it doesn't do you any good to just keep complaining about it and not doing anything. So in that instance, you can repeat that affirmation. All right, so if I'm taking full responsibility, what does this mean? So I am responsible for not knocking on my neighbor's door saying, hey, can you turn it down? It's 1 a.m. I need to get to bed. I need to rest well for work tomorrow. I have a big thing coming up. That's something that you can do. And so that's what the personal responsibility aspect looks like. And something that piggybacks on that is asking yourself, what, if you were to do it right now, what would scare you? And what would scare you shitless? That is a good place to start, to identify where in your life you have given up your power and where you can begin to reclaim it. So that's all I have for today's video. I hope there was something that stood out to you that can be beneficial to you and your journey of beginning to reclaim your power, which is your very birthright. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.